Fellow Toastmasters, guests, full house, a lot of guests, great to see you. Thank you for listening to this speech. This is the rise of the nuns, and it's not the black habit and nun you kind of think of. It's nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns like void. The rise of the nuns is a term used by Bishop Robert Barron to describe the astronomical rise in the percentage of the American population that claim no religious affiliation. Bishop Barron is the Archbishop of Los Angeles. Well, why I like him? Well, I like him for a variety of reasons, but he's a Chicago guy, 58 years old, went to Bennett Academy in Fenwick, has a very solid Midwestern attitude. He's born and raised in Chicago. While he was at the Mundelein Seminary, Cardinal Francis George asked him to use new technology, use new modes to evangelize, and he started wordonfire.org, and anyway, it's great. But as you can see from this chart, kidding. The percentage of Americans who describe themselves as having no religious affiliation is currently at 25%. That's 80 million Americans with no religious affiliation. If you consider the demographics of 30 and under, that percentage is 40%. Additionally, the meteoric rise is of great concern. 12 years ago, the percentage hovered around 15%. That's pretty incredible if you think about that, the amount of young people that claim no religious affiliation. This is the topic of my speech, and it's kind of a concern of mine. And I believe that some of the ills of our society directly can point to this, the divisiveness we see in our political arenas, and just general lack of civility, and it concerns me. I have young children, and it concerns me greatly. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. Let's see. One more thought on secularization. The bloodiest century in the history of mankind was the 20th century. Over 100 million deaths. Practically none of them had to do with religion. Ideological secularization and modern nationalism were the great sources of this bloodshed. Okay, so how did we get here? I think it's a combination of two things. The first being scientism. Robert Barron describes that as the need to have everything explained in the scientific method, and that could be the only truth. In other words, there are no other truths except for one that can be proven scientifically. And I don't personally ascribe to that. It's something that I believe there are other truths. So what is the scientific method? That is the method by where you observe, you make a hypothesis, you have an experiment, and then you draw a conclusion. As for absolutes, the nuns have kind of a whatever attitude. There really are no absolutes. It's kind of whatever's good for you, that's good, and whatever's good for me, that's good, and there is no truth. I don't know, yeah, whatever, no truth. It sort of leaves you void of energy, and void of meaning, and void of direction. That's how I feel. It's very hard to be astonished when you're in charge. In other words, if you know exactly what's coming down the pike and you are in control, or you feel you're in control, it's hard to be astonished. And I think that's how I led my life for almost my whole life until the birth of my son Aiden. And at that point, I absolutely knew I wasn't in control. And I had a great sense of peace about that, and a joy that I had really never felt before. So this sense of astonishment, this sense of when you look at a beautiful sunset, it's hard to describe that in scientific terms, but That's astonishing. The birth of a child is astonishing. A work of art that's like otherworldly. That's astonishing. I was in awe. I knew the moment that my son was born, my life would never be the same. I was grateful. I was very grateful. At that point, I knew that my control was gone, and I knew that I was astonished. If you know what to expect, if you know what's coming, you won't be astonished. Bishop Barron gives another example of astonishment. He talks of Mother Teresa. So she was a nun walking down the road, and she heard the voice of God saying that she needed to take care of the poorest of the poor. She could not explain this. She was astonished. And the voice told her to give her life to the poorest of the poor. I need a secretary or something up here. That is the definition of indescribable, of being astonished. There's a certain poverty of the soul if we can't find ourselves in that state, being amazed. I think our spirit will have a certain dullness if we can't feel that, if we don't ever experience that. Lastly, Bishop Barron speaks of treasure. Not the treasure, not the noun, but the verb. He says that the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, the essays of Dante and Newman, these are transcendent truths worthy of treasuring. Those that drift into nunhood cannot treasure these things, rather only look to their world for truth. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, I think we should make ourselves small. There's a red card. Does that mean I'm done? I'm over? Give me about 1 minute. I'll wrap this up. I think there's a St. Therese Lisieux. It's called the Little Flower, where you make yourself small. You subjugate your will to the will of others. And I believe that the path to great joy is the little flower. In putting ourselves first, in putting the will of others first, we subjugate our own will. Very tough, but it is the essence of love. John 4:7 tells us that God is love, therefore it is the essence of unconditional love. That's kind of a paradox, right? I mean, because if you have love, or you feel you have love, or you're full of love, you need to give it away, right? To get more, you need to give it away. And that's an interesting paradox in and by itself. You only get it when you give it away. So, what I'm going to ask you guys to do, Brendan, is take a nun out to lunch, and remember to give it away. God bless you all. Thanks for listening.